Past life regression. I just had a discussion few days back with someone about past life regression, and I was a little curious to understand how true it is, and is it really evidence based? Is it really authentic, or it's just another of those quack kind of practices which are being pursued and followed globally, like. So I was trying to find out that where can I find some information about this and whom can I, discuss with. So I came across a wonderful person, Gabriel Andrade. He is presently a professor. He's a professor of ethics and behavioral sciences. Presently, he's teaching in the medical college in United Arab Emirates. So I came across a wonderful paper which he had written with a lot of details and great study. And this article was written 7 years back when he was teaching in the Department of Ethics and Behavioral Sciences in a medical college in Aruba, in the Dutch Caribbean. So let's just hear out. Here we had a nice conversation, half an hour conversation. It is not totally conclusive. Probably we'll have another round of conversation to understand what is our understanding about past life regression. Is it really true?
Hi, Gabriel. Nice to connect with you. And I have a YouTube channel on spirituality and meditation, and I post some content on social issues also. And while navigating through this domain, I also touch upon certain other areas like astrology. I come across people who are also into astrology, and then there's this PLR and near death experience and out of body experience and healing and Reiki and all this kind of irrational art, I would say. In my understanding, I don't find them so rational. And though I'm also into spirituality, but I go very scientifically into this. So I came across this video on PLR yesterday. And while searching for PLR, I went to search, I want to get some information on PLR, past life regression, and I chanced upon your article, which looked very interesting. And I thought I will try to reach out to you. And if I can connect with you, it would be nice to have a very conversation with people who are more scientific, like because when I'm in a spiritual domain, I meet a lot of people who are from an artistic domain, not from scientific domain. But now I'm trying to have conversation with people with who are from a scientific domain because I'm also an electrical engineer, and it makes sense to talk things more rationally into this paranormal space or something which has no evidence, as you have been mentioning in your thing. So, just introducing myself, and I thought I will introduce myself, and I will request you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got into this PLR thing and how did you end up writing this article about this PLR, because I did see that you are from the ethics and uh, behavioral science department of your medical college. So I'll
Hmm.
just hand over to you to talk a little bit about that, and then we can have a conversation. I will also give my points about that.
Well, very well. Thank you for your introduction, and it's very nice meeting you and getting to know people in India. I've been myself to India, and I know that the rationalist and the skeptic movement is it has its representatives there. So I commend you for that, and I commend the Indian rationalists and skeptics for for their activism and all that. Yeah, I teach behavioral science and ethics to medical students here in the United Arab Emirates, but they're mostly international students. And I've written quite a few articles. I still haven't written a book, but I hope to do so in the future about different aspects of ethics in medical practice. And this was before I transitioned to English. When I was writing in my own language, I did write a few books on various topics having to do with philosophy. And I was always interested in the idea of life after death. Uh, and I mean, I wanted to see if there was anything to it. So I began exploring what people had said, and of course, there are various models in the Abrahamic religions. It's resurrection and so on. And I wanted to see if there was any evidence for that, apart from just because some religious book says that some person died and rose 3 days later or something like that. And no, I mean, unsurprisingly, I didn't find anything. And then I also looked for other models of life after death, and these are more in the dharmic religions like Hinduism or Buddhism and so on. And although it can be, this has been subject to some caricature, but yeah, we can say that the East is more prone on reincarnation models, whereas the West is more prone on resurrection models. And I wanted to see if there was some evidence to that in the Eastern world. So I found that in the Western world, there is nothing that really supports the idea that one survives death. But I wanted to see if there was something to it in the Eastern model. So I took a look, and there have been people who have tried to find some evidence. So, for example, one of them was Ian Stevenson, he was I don't know if he was American or Canadian, a psychiatrist who went to India and other
Yes.
countries like Sri Lanka and in Pakistan and some other countries, in the area of South Asia, but then also to other countries like Turkey and Brazil. And he went around collecting stories about reincarnation. And basically, what he did was he would find a little boy or a girl, although in most cases they were little boys. And this boy all of a sudden would claim to remember past lives. And, he would take notes on what those lives were like. And he would go and try to confirm what that little boy was saying. And apparently, it turned out that everything that those little boys were saying was true, right? And so he published a lot of books with these types of study. But of course, when you really get into the details, you realize that there's nothing extraordinary, because we can go into greater detail later on if you wish me to. But there are many methodological flaws in those studies, right? But that really caught my eye because, as opposed to what's going on in the claims of resurrection in the West, which, by the way, I mean, in the West, when it comes to resurrection, in the Abrahamic religions, it's left until the day of judgment, right? So, I mean, they acknowledge that nobody has resurrected yet, except Jesus or, some important religious figures. But other than those exceptions, nobody has resurrected yet. And people from Islam and Christianity and Judaism, they accept that. Some say, well, there's still the soul that somehow goes somewhere, waiting until resurrection comes, right? But so they acknowledge that that's far into the future. But what really caught my attention when it came to the Eastern claims of reincarnation is that they don't have to wait until judgment day or anything like that. Like, reincarnation happens on a daily basis. So they have a more abundance of claims in saying that, oh, this is already happening, and they prefer to provide evidence that supports these claims, right? So I began to look at it, but even though at first it seems attractive, once you take a look at the details, you realize that all of that is flawed, because there's just the evidence is just not strong enough. But what I was interested in, it was also how some medical practitioners have embraced this idea, and they have tried to come up with psychotherapeutical concepts as part of their practice. And this has been both in the West and in the East, right? And this is how the concept of past life regression works. Basically, the patient undergoes hypnosis, and then they go back to previous times in their lives. And I mean, to a certain extent, that may be a legitimate procedure, because there may be some psychiatric conditions in which your memory is blocked, and you need to go back to a particular event in order to, revisit that event and overcome whatever traumatic experience you may have had. So hypnosis in and of itself is not necessarily an, let's say, an unethical procedure, or it's open to debate, it's controversial, but I wouldn't rule it out altogether. So going back in time to revisit some past experience through hypnosis, I would say it's fine in some cases, right? But the thing is that because of this movement to embrace concepts from the Dharmic religions and so on, some practitioners, and these have been mostly in Western countries, they have wanted to use hypnosis to go back in time, not just to your childhood, but allegedly to things that happened even before your childhood. And of course, the premise is here is that you did not begin to exist when you were born, but uh, you've been existing for a very long time, and maybe you've gone through the cycle many times, right? So basically, the idea is that many of or some of the problems that you may be facing today, actually, they can go back to the previous lives you had. And what you need to do is to visit those previous lives, all of this under hypnosis, and confront the fears and the difficult experiences that you had and that are troubling you today. So, for example, this is only an example. If someone has some sense of, let's say, gender dysphoria, right? This is becoming very common in the West. That you were born with a male body, but somehow you feel you're a woman, and so on. Uh, well, according to these tenets, if you can be hypnotized and go back to the time when in previous lives maybe you were a woman, and then coming to terms with that identity of being a woman, then maybe you can handle now better your gender dysphoria and stuff like that. Or maybe if you're very depressed, but there's nothing in particular in this life that has made you depressed, well, maybe it's because in your previous life you went through some trauma or something like that, right? Uh, I mean, the idea is it seems reasonable if the premises were true. If it is true that we go through various cycles of reincarnation and so on, then yeah, I mean, maybe there is something to it. The problem is that this premise is very questionable. Uh, and I would say for two main reasons. First of all, because there just is no evidence for that. And second of all, because there are also some conceptual problems. I would say that the idea of reincarnation is problematic in and of itself because it has conceptual problems. So it's not only that it lacks empirical support; it's also that even if there were something suggestive of reincarnation in the empirical data, you would still have to face the problem of explaining exactly how it takes place and how you can overcome some of the conceptual difficulties that it faces. So basically, that's my approach to past life reincarnation. I can tell you more,
Yeah. So
but I mean, I will let you take the conversation wherever you wish.
yeah. So what happened is I went through your this paper yesterday, and before this call again I went through it, and I read all about Stevenson, and I also read a lot about reincarnation. What you have was written over there, and what you've spoken now. My take was reincarnation is one aspect which maybe there may not be there. And I have my own ideas about reincarnation, why we assume that there is, why do we believe that there is reincarnation? There are different aspects which I can share. There are two things which make people believe in reincarnation. Maybe you can call it Eastern philosophy or Eastern religion, because we have a lot of scriptures where they talk about past lives. When there are some scriptures like Ramayana and Mahabharata, so there are conversation in which two people are talking, which is there in part of the scripture, and they are mentioning past lives. So that's one. I cannot call it evidence. Because I still I'm doing some kind of research about these scriptures also, that how true these scriptures are. Because first thing is these scriptures are written through verbal transmission, and I do see some bit of influence which people have written. Like all religions were written by people, not by God. Jesus never wrote Bible, nor any of the Hindu scriptures are written by. These have been said to be transmitted verbally, and somewhere they've been written and captured in a print form. So who knows that who has influenced these, who has embedded something more for someone's vested interest. I'm finding some contradictions here. I'm noting them down, and to kind of counter the authenticity of these. So I'm doing some, because I'm reading one scripture now, Ramayana, and I'm finding some contradictions there. And I read another scripture some time back, and I found some contradictions there also, which probably the person who encoded this book did not realize that whoever is writing it is creating contradictions. So reincarnation. Now this is one point I'm talking, giving reference to the scriptures. Second thing is my own experiences, spiritual experiences, which I had. Like if you talk about that we are soul, we can say we are soul, or we can say soul may not be there, soul may be there. So soul is something formless, and as you wrote in your paper also, that how can something which has no form come into a form? So yes, so that is a very rational thinking. But soul is something which they say it cannot be experienced in these two dimensions. It can be only experienced. It cannot be explained. So it can be only experienced, it cannot be explained. And I had some experiences beyond time and space, which made me think that we are this world is not the real world. There is something beyond this. So there is a experience of going beyond this, which again I can say, but I have no documentary evidence. I don't have any proof. These are only feelings or experiences which one can have, and I had these experiences a couple of times during my trips to the Himalayas, and I met some yogis there. So I'm not. So I'm putting this two aspects to the reincarnation theory, and also there will be some more logical analysis. But obviously, there's no documentary proof. But if there is a logic to some of these reincarnation theories, but now I don't want to talk about reincarnation. Basically, our topic was PLR, past life regression. And in past life regression, if somebody is taking somebody to past life, this itself, I don't agree to this, because as I feel, this is actually hypnosis is nothing but a mental manipulation of people who are gone to the extreme of trying to believe that there is past life and somebody will take me to the past life. How can that be so easy? Because scientifically, if you see, the memory seems to fade, and we can correlate to so many things in our present life. Like my mother passed away 32 years back, 34 years back. I don't remember her. She's gone completely out of my memory. And so many things in our childhood also we don't remember now. How much do we remember? We don't remember anything. When I was 2 year old, 3 year old, I was born in a town called Varanasi. I have no memory of that town because I was probably 2 year old, 1 year old. I just don't remember anything of that time. So how can you remember something of past birth? And how can then somebody open up your subconscious memory if it is stored in your subconscious memory? How can somebody open by hypnosis, or it's basically mental manipulation there? I've come across somebody who do these tricks of trying to guide you to make you believe and think in a certain way, because they make you assume certain things and you start imagining. And it's all a part of a imaginative manipulation, I feel, where they make you imagine that. And people who go for these kind of things, the, another point is, when people are going to PLR, they majority of people who have problems in life, they are looking for attributing these problems to something external. That's the main problem. And the spirituality which talks, in Hindu religion or Buddhism, talks about that the problem is with you only. The problem is, now there is law of karma. So the law of karma is very important part of all the religion. And if we have law of karma, then definitely everything which is happening is due to the law of karma. Whatever you did, you get redeemed for that. So if that is one theory which is acceptable broadly, then why do we look for something? Why do we attribute to astrology, like blame it on stars, or why do we want to attribute it to something in the past life? So probably I think this is a mental manipulation where a person who has a problem goes to past life regression and is made to convince that something happened in a past life. That's why this is happening now. And he closes a chapter. This is like a psychic treatment. It's like making a fool of that guy and then make him get out of that trauma which he's going through. This is what my understanding is. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't think you and I are on the same, are exactly on the same page. But I mean, I'm happy to disagree because the first part of your explanation having to do with scriptures, no, I don't give any value to that. I mean, uh, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, one
Yeah,
can
I did
study
mention.
historic.
I did mention that the scripture is also not real evidence. I'm also agreeing to that. I'm only telling you these scriptures talk. What is the evidence? Scripture. Scripture is really something which we can really believe as a proof. No, I think because we don't know who wrote when it was written. So how true it is? Because you can believe, you can agree to something what you have seen. And second part, I'm talking about spiritual experiences which make you feel, which again cannot be documented. So these are the 2 points about reincarnation. But I'm talking about
Yeah,
PLR. Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, yeah, and I would also like to add, yeah, I mean, you may have had experiences, but if they're not really, let's say, they cannot be empirically contrasted with some evidence, then I mean, just as you say that you experienced something, someone else can say that they experienced something else, and it's
Yeah.
difficult to tell, how this happened. But regarding PLR, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I'm not sure that it's entirely illegitimate to look for something hidden in your unconscious. I mean, I do think the unconscious exists, and this is something that when psychoanalysis was brought up by Freud and all those psychiatrists in the early 20th century. I think it was a revolution. Freud said some things that a lot of people just say today that it's junk, and I would agree with that. But if you scratch under the surface or some of the silly things that Freud and his colleagues said, I think there's some truth to the idea that our mental contents are not only on the conscious level, but there are many things that are on the unconscious, and that they can also drive part of our behavior. So I think that's something that's acceptable. Now, whether or
But
not
what is the basis?
hypnosis,
What is the basis of accepting this also? Because this is also without any empirical or evidence.
well, there are some things that people do without knowing why, and there have been experiments that point in that direction. And it does suggest that there are some unconscious contents there. Now, it is true that experimental psychology goes more for whatever the cognitive approach is present in the conscious. But there have been, I would say, there is some empirical support to the idea that the unconscious exists, and the form that those experiments take is then when you ask subjects to do particular tasks, and they do particular things without really knowing why. And for example, even though subliminal influence has been hyped and it doesn't really happen in the way people think it does have some little effect. I mean, you can certainly prime people to act in a particular manner, and they will behave in this way or that way without knowing really why, but they will still do it. Now, that suggests that there's some unconscious mental content driving their behavior in a particular way. So I do think that the unconscious is there. Now, how to get there? That's more open to debate. I mean, Freud, for example, thought that dreams tell you a lot about your unconscious thoughts. I'm not. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think dreams are really a window into the unconscious, or at least not the way Freud thought. Right. Uh, Now, whether or not hypnosis can open the windows to the unconscious, I think it's open to debate. I don't think the debate is settled. Some people say that through some particular hypnotic practices, you can go back to some experiences and try to remember them, even though you may be blocked from those experiences right now. Now, it's not like, for example, you mentioned that you don't remember when you were 1 year old, the surroundings of your house or something like that when you were 1 year old. I would think that hypnosis can never get someone to to the place where they were when they were 1 year old. No, but there are some traumatic experiences, let's say rape or some accident, or some very traumatic experience that happened to you as an adult, but because of dissociation and other defense mechanisms, you try to block them from your inner self, right? But it's still there affecting your life. I think there is some evidence, it's not conclusive, but there is some evidence that hypnosis can help in overcoming this dissociation by going to the original traumatic event that occasioned the dissociation. So I would say that hypnosis, under very limited circumstances, does have some role to play in psychotherapeutical practice. But this is only in cases when there is some dissociation going on as a result of some traumatic event. My criticism of past life regression, which I would think that you would share with me, is that they try to use this to go far beyond what hypnosis is really capable of. Uh, Again, I think it's open to debate, but there is some evidence suggesting that hypnosis can help you recover some memories from very traumatic events. But from there to go on and to say that you can remember things when you were 1 year old or when you were inside your mother's womb or even before you were born in previous lives, there simply is no evidence for that. And it's also very important to understand one thing, and this is why hypnosis, even though it may achieve some things, it's quite dangerous, and I would not advise it. There is the risk of implanting
Yeah,
false memories
false memory.
into the person who undergoes this, and I think this especially came to the fore during the times of the satanic scare in the US. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in Western countries during the 80s, there was a wave of people who were saying that they were abused by their parents and by their communities in satanic ritual, right? And when they asked them, okay, but how did this happen? Give me details. They just didn't know. But then they underwent hypnotic sessions, which took them back to those supposedly original experiences. And then they described them in some detail. And, the details were very sensationalist, black robes and knives and human sacrifice and goats, all the stuff you see in the movies and stuff like that, right? Uh, and on this basis, the police in many of these Western countries were concerned that there might have been some religious cults of devil worshipping, committing crimes, and so on. But ultimately, the only testimonies or the only evidence that supported this was testimony on the basis of recovered memories from hypnotic sessions. Now, ultimately, when the police did investigations, they didn't find any evidence that these groups really existed, and it was all in the imagination of the people claiming this, right? But they were not really lying either. I mean, they really did believe this, and they really did believe that this happened to them. It's not like they were manipulating other people just to get attention or something like that. No, they did go, they underwent the hypnotic sessions, but the problem is that because during hypnosis, you're in a high state of suggestion. You can be influenced significantly by the way that the person conducting the hypnotic session can take it in this or that direction, right?
Yeah,
So
I was about to ask you what is hypnosis. In my understanding, all these practices are all mental manipulation.
yeah, there of course there's manipulation. I mean, obviously the thing is how it begins, and maybe you've seen it on TV. Swinging a pendulum and asking the person to focus on that. That's not a caricature. That's how it really works. So what you basically is ask the person to go through a deep state of relaxation, focus on a particular movement, and just focus intensely on that while being very relaxed until you achieve some trance state. And then once you achieve that trance state, the person who initially gave you the commands by swinging the pendulum and so on will take you back in time, usually progressively, and it has to be done in a gentle manner. So, of course, there's manipulation. No, you cannot do this against someone's will. It doesn't work like that. I mean, for a person to be hypnotized, that person has to be agreeable. That person has to be willing to be hypnotized.
So
And
that
there's some
itself,
people in the world.
that itself is a step of surrendering. Somebody who's going to manipulate you, and then take you to some kind of imagination.
Yes, exactly. You have to be someone who is willing to be under the command of someone else,
Yeah.
because it's a form of submission. And people who undergo hypnosis, that's the way it has to be. I mean, you cannot be hypnotized against your will. Although
So
sometimes movies,
this is contradictory in a sense. This whole process is contradictory because somebody wants to manipulate and you are willing to get manipulated, and we agree to this as a process. So this is like uh,
yeah.
counter.
I mean, obviously, because yeah, of course, from the beginning, the person being hypnotized agrees that they will follow the command of the person doing the hypnotizing, right? And I mean, just from the onset, there's already some measure of manipulation there because you are willing to follow what the other person tells you to do, and you're willing to submit to the commands of the other person. But the people who undergo hypnosis usually, what they interpret is that this is good for themselves because maybe they want to revisit some trauma in their past and they want to overcome it, and on their own they cannot reach those memories, so they want to reach them with the help of a hypnotist. But they understand that in order for them to reach that those memories, they have to undergo this process of submission, right? So of course there is a manipulation,
I think
but you know,
these are different ways of brainwashing. I think these are different techniques to brainwash, because there is a lot of brainwashing. Marketing is a brainwashing. Creating narratives in society, perceptions in society is also brainwashing. Education is also brainwashing people a lot. There are a lot of paradoxes in the society, a lot of myths in the society. So they're all brainwashing initiatives, and probably this is also probably I feel is because there are a lot of techniques in the society, many techniques which are not scientific, and we all debate about them. I feel they are all in some way developed to create a kind of a business model around it.
well, brainwashing is not a proper scientific term because it has a controversial history of its own, and we can talk about that if you wish. But yeah, I would say that there's manipulation on many levels, and hypnosis certainly works on some level of manipulation. Now, one can say that, well, but it's manipulation for a good purpose, which is to revisit traumatic memories in order to overcome them. Okay,
But
I mean,
manipulation is manipulation, whether it's for a good purpose or a bad purpose, it is manipulation.
eh, yeah, but I mean, it also depends on what you call manipulation itself, because if you say, okay, I'm going to submit to your commands so that you help me eventually go to the original memory that I'm trying to recover. Well, I'm not sure if I would call that manipulation. It's certainly a form of submission. Uh, and certainly, in order to do that, I have to, renounce some of my willpower to you. So there's definitely a power differential. But this power differential happens in every therapeutic relationship. I mean, when you go to a doctor, you submit to what the doctor says. When you go to, and if you go under surgery, I mean, there is some manipulation there.
There's a difference between a doctor and a therapist, because a doctor is supported by a degree and clear-cut evidential studies, like
Well, but
compared to what these
unfortunately, no,
traditions.
but unfortunately, many of these therapies do have degrees, and many of them have medical degrees.
Yeah,
My
because
contention
there is a
is that
overlap. There is a overlap, but they are without really evidential support, experimental
yeah,
support.
on that I fully agree. On that I fully agree, and that's why I think it's unethical. Uh, well, first of all, because as you say, there is no evidence whatsoever that through hypnosis one can go to the very early phases of life or even before life. And in the case of even before life, the problem is twofold, because if you claim to go back to the early phases of life, well, at least we know that those early phases exist. But if you go further back, you're purporting to go to previous lives for which there is no evidence. That's the first ethical problem. But the second ethical problem, which may be even worse than the first one, it's that there are risks involved in past life regression therapy, and that is implanting false memories. And to go back to the case of the satanic scares, this is what happened. I mean, these people imagined that they were being raped and that they were participating in human sacrifices. And they claimed to remember that, but in fact, it was the practitioner who was implanting in the people being hypnotized this memory. Now, this may not be a deliberate act. It may not be that that the person doing the hypnosis had a preconceived plan of convincing the person that somehow they were being that they were participating in human sacrifices
So
and so on. No,
this is a good assumption to have, actually,
what assumption?
that they may not be planning to take them there to that kind of situation.
I think for the most part, they do not plan in advance to plant false memories. I mean, I don't think. I mean, I think these people who do hypnosis to other people to take them back in time, they're not particularly evil people or anything like that, but they are ignorant of how the mind works, and they think that what they think it's a recovered memory, it's actually an implanted memory. And that's, to go back to this case that I've been talking to you about. During the satanic scare, people believed that they were being forced to participate in human sacrifices and so on, because they claimed to recover those memories, when in fact it was the practitioner who was implanting in them those memories, but many times inadvertently so. Now, for example, the way it usually goes, it's like, oh, you're going back in time when you were 8. What do you see? And then the person who's being hypnotized might say something like, oh, I see someone wearing a black shirt, for example. Now, upon hearing the word black shirt, the hypnotist might say, oh my goodness, this may be related to some satanic ritual.
I
So
think
he may ask, is
I
the
have a
black.
I have a point here because this is where the manipulation starts. I don't know. They ask people to tell what they're seeing. Probably, I think I may be wrong that they may be giving them choices, and based on choices, they then take them to the next level of choice.
Yeah, well, it usually starts with vague language.
Mhm.
So, the person undergoing hypnosis is asked, okay, what do you see? Or tell me your surroundings, or this or that. And they just give very vague statements about where they are.
Mhm.
Now, if the person practicing the hypnosis has some preconceived idea of what he's looking for, what kind of memory he's looking for, very vague stimuli will be taken to be interpreted towards the direction of what the practitioner wants to find. So, for example, like, to go back to the example of the black shirt, I mean, a black shirt can mean anything. It can be used in many settings. But if you already have the preconceived idea that somehow the color black is associated with Satan worshiping and so on, I can say, oh, you remember wearing a black shirt. Did it have a hood, for example? Or was it silky or shiny? And then the person being hypnotized will say, yes, yes, I see it now. Now you see what's going on there. You're implanting on the person the idea of the hood. Now it
Yes.
may it may be that this is done inadvertently. I don't think the practitioner is really evil, or has a preconceived plan to deliberately
No,
plant
they are.
false.
I don't think they're evil, but they are, I think, being dumb, unscientific.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, dumb to the extent that they don't really know how the mind works, and they're very irresponsible because they have not taken into consideration the risks of this
Yes.
type of therapy. And the big risk is implanting false memories, which I mean, and the big problem is that once these memories become implanted in the patient undergoing hypnosis, they can become very frightening. And to the person that was hypnotized, they can become real themselves, even though they never happened, but now they stay with them and they can be traumatized by it. So it is a risky procedure. That's why uh, it's quite unethical to carry it on, not only because it lacks evidence, but also because of the harm that can be done with this type of therapy.
So great. I think our time is also over.
Thanks for watching. Perhaps we will have another round of discussion so that we can draw some conclusion about this subject of past life regression.